The book is called In Place of a Show, What Happens Inside Theatres When Nothing is Happening. It came about because originally I was thinking about performance and specifically contemporary performance and its relationship to theatres, theatre buildings. The kinds of theatres, in fact, which we might associate with having features like red curtains and balconies, stage, of course, a proscenium arch. And so all this kind of apparatus, which to a contemporary sensibility anyway, might appear to be obsolete or anachronistic. And I began to wonder if, in fact, this setup is, in fact, very relevant to our times, precisely to the extent that it has been, let's say, rendered obsolete. And I started to think that perhaps this old theatre, let's call it, that it survives its own dismantling, yes, and perhaps by coming undone, it continues its work. So I began to visit theatres, specifically theatres that are closed or unused for whatever reasons, some that are abandoned, and some that are even demolished, no longer there. And each time, the task that I gave myself was to try and figure out how I could approach each particular place, to consider what kind of potentialities were already at work in each specific theatre, so material potentialities, but also historical or imaginative potentialities. And the task for me was to try and figure out what the invitation was from each place, and what modes of writing could I use to try and listen and sort of tune in to the specific theatre. And so the book is organized around 4 chapters, and each chapter focuses on one particular theatre. The first is the Cuvilliés Theater in Munich. Now this is a Baroque opera house which was meticulously dismantled during the World War II bombings, and so its interior was hidden outside of the city. And then 6 weeks later the building was indeed bombed, but by that point it was merely an empty shell. After the war, the parts of the hidden interior were recovered and perfectly reassembled on site, giving the impression of indestructibility, let's say. So this chapter looks in detail at questions concerning the theatre's preservation as a means to obscure historical ruination. The second chapter is on London's Dalston Theatre, which was demolished in 2007 to make way for a shopping and residential complex. So here I explore how a theatre might be seen to linger long after it is gone, manifesting in subtle ways within sites and places that apparently bear no relation to the old theatre. And so, for instance, I visit a Starbucks cafe, which is located where the theatre would have been, or I find a message traced by finger on a dusty glass panel, or I study the comings and goings of passerbys. The third chapter revolves around a bird. Strangely, during a visit to the Teatro Olimpico in the Italian city of Vicenza, I witnessed a lone swallow flying beneath the ceiling of the auditorium, which is painted as a sky. And so the chapter is an attempt at tracing how the flight of the bird turned the empty theatre into a place for cross-species inhabitation and co-presence. And then finally, the last chapter is based on a trip to the Teatro Amazonas, the famous opera house in the Amazon jungle. The chapter explores the interplay between theatre and non-human nature, and particularly reflecting on the opera house's construction at a time when that part of Brazil was supplying most of the world's rubber. So the book connects different time periods, different continents, and it also blends different forms of writing, so narrative, scholarly, speculative modes of writing, let's say. And the task really is to try and pay attention to those phenomena that are typically cast in the background of theatre. So things like non-human animals or plant life, insects, things like swirls of dust feature in the book, or just kind of inanimate objects, so the material histories of chairs and curtains and walls and so on. It turns out, I guess, that there is a lot happening inside theatres when nothing is happening. As long as we can invent and practice modes of noticing and articulating what those phenomena might be.